Welcome to the Transaction Tax and Youth Citizens Oversight Committee meeting. I'm calling this meeting to order, and the time is
408.
4:08. Can you make a roll call?
Yes. Member Diaz,
Here.
Member Lopez, Member Vic, Member Williams,
Here.
Member Scribner,
Here.
Chair Scribner.
Okay, we'll now hold public comments.
We have no public comments.
Do we have any presentations?
No.
Okay, this is a consent calendar. We will now consider items on the consent calendar, which will be enacted in one motion unless there is a request to remove an item from discussion. May I have a motion and a second to approve our consent calendar?
Motion to.
Okay.
Commence.
Okay. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. All opposed? None. So hearing none, motion passes unanimously.
Okay, so business items. Creation of capital reserve fund.
Good afternoon, Measure U Oversight Committee. I will be going over the Capital Reserve Fund policy that was just recently approved by City Council. Afternoon. Before I do that, let me go through the agenda items. I have all of the presentations together on the same PowerPoint, so I'll go over the Measure U, provide Measure U Oversight Committee an overview of the general fund capital reserve policy that was just approved by Council on November 20th. The second item, I'll be providing a summary of the Measure U revenues and expenditures for 3 fiscal years, fiscal year 2020, 2021, 2021, 2022, and 2022, 2023. And the next item on the agenda is for the committee to consider an appointment of 1 or 2 members to prepare the annual report and documentation for submission to the committee, to the Measure U committee, and then to City Council. And then the last item is to adopt the 2024 proposed meeting schedule for next calendar year. And so with that, just want to touch a little bit on the capital reserve policy that was just approved. The city did not have a reserve policy for capital projects before. We presented a policy to council and it was approved on November 20th. And just want to talk about the purpose. So the purpose of creating this capital improvement reserve is really allocating funds into a pool of money or an account, a savings account that basically locks those funds for that specific purpose. And so those funds cannot be used for anything else. So once they're allocated to that fund, then they're appropriated for a specific use. And if for whatever reason those projects don't get executed, for whatever the reason is, those funds remain in that fund. So they can be reallocated, repurposed for other projects.
So they can never come out. Other than to
If
be
they would probably need council approval if we're gonna allocate them back to general fund for a specific reason. But
That's what I was gonna say. Is this working?
not very well.
Not very well. Should I just
have
come
it.
up there, you think?
Yeah.
Okay. But The zero risk about it is that, we were trying to explain to the council that, when you do this, if we ever get in a really, really bad situation 10 years down the road or something, and we've built up a big capital reserve fund, and then the city's in a budget crunch or something, the, the, the city council would have the ability to then say, okay, we're gonna touch it, but the intent is to not let anybody else decide to touch it and to not have it get mixed in with other funding, and then we're spending money that was intended to go to another project, that kind of a thing. So, so the goal is, we have a long list of projects. I think we did a CIP review recently, and I think we had something like, what was it, $25 million in projects or something? Um, yeah, and one of my points was each time we approved a project, we took the money and we put it into the capital reserve and we earmarked it for that project where we couldn't spend it, then we would actually have the money to do all those projects. But that hasn't been the practice. So we had 20 some million dollars in projects, but we didn't have 20 some million dollars. So we're just trying to sort of keep it where when a project gets approved, the money goes into the capital reserve and it stays there for that project. Yeah, the analogy that I've given everybody everybody's probably tired of hearing, but I'm like, if you're saving money to fix your roof at home and then you decide you want to buy a new car, and you buy the car, uh, the analogy with the city is like, well, we saved money for the roof. Well, no, you spent it, you know? Uh, you actually have to make sure that you really save it for the roof and you aren't spending it somewhere else. And this is how we sort of create that other account and say, this is the roof fund. You can't spend it for anything other than the roof.
But the council could, in a case of emergency, make that decision, pull it out of there and use.
Mhm. But it would have to have council approval and it'd have to be a deliberate, conscious decision made in public at a council meeting.
Okay, so let me ask you, so say if a project's, money's allocated for that project.
Yeah.
And then for whatever reason, they decide they're not gonna do the project, is that money gonna go back into it, or is that gonna go into another fund to like raise the, I guess you'd say, savings for another project?
Yeah, so the idea right now is that money that goes into the capital reserve fund goes into the fund and doesn't come out.
Right.
And so if a project gets postponed, let's say, for example, we put $100,000 aside for, actually, and maybe a good example, we had a $75,000 project to fix up the museum.
Right.
And now we've got a plan together where that's only supposed to cost us about $25,000. So the theory and what we're trying to set up is, if we spend 25,000 on the museum, the 50,000 still stays in the reserve fund, and now we have money starting to build up for future projects.
Okay,
So theoretically, we could always take an item to council and go, hey, we saved 50,000, so we don't need it in the reserve. And so we are asking for approval to take it back out of the reserve.
okay,
But I don't anticipate doing that for a long time because my goal is to build up the reserve fund
okay,
so that we have money to fund all the projects we've said we were going to do.
okay.
Yeah, so the reserve was actually, we've already started, we funded with an initial $1.5 million that we are projecting that was going to be a part of the surplus for the year that we just closed, 2023. And so that entry has already been made, so $1.5 million has been swept already, so it's in there. And then the goal is, as city manager pointed out, is to every year allocate funds to the reserve from different revenue sources, one of them being Measure U. And the goal is to have a long-term CIP funding for projects over the long term. Obviously, we're just starting now, so right now what's in the reserve is just the initial funding, but we will have, and I'll get into it when we talk about the revenues and expenditures as to what the goal is.
And this is where you guys come in, because I think to that point, my goal each year is that Measure U committee approves what the Measure U funding, or I guess recommends, right, to the council, but recommends where the Measure U funds should be spent. And if some of those are projects, then those items would be um, items that would be funded through the capital reserve. So, for example, if bad example, because it's probably not something that Well, actually, let's use the police station remodel that we're doing, which has the, you know, the public facing aspects of having our customer service window and everything. So if we got that project approved by the Measure U committee, and let's say it's $100,000, then as we develop our budget and we each year try to allocate funding into the capital reserve, that would be $100,000 that if you agreed and then the council agreed would go into that capital reserve fund for that project. And again, the main thing is because just in the past, if it didn't go into a capital reserve, I think we saw sort of a history over the last 10 years where when another more important project came around, it would be, we'll just take that money
Right.
and use it for this. So we're trying to prevent that from happening.
So this is a major change from what's happened to this point, which was after the fact, we were given a list of where the money went with no say in it whatsoever.
Right.
And the only mandate that I felt we had at that point was to be able to say, yes, that money went to one of those things listed under Measure U, which it and it all did, except we have this budget surplus of
Yeah.
170,
Yep.
7.725 or something that is in the general fund that's not accounted for. So this allows us to put it someplace and
Yeah.
have it accounted for.
Exactly. So the two work in tandem, you know, in the first two, so the point you were making, the goal is moving from just sort of reviewing last year's budget. And I don't really, you know, we were talking about it. I'm like, I don't really understand what the goal of that was. Cause if we spent it somewhere we shouldn't have, it's like, well, what's the recourse now to fix it, you know? So the goal is to move to being proactive, looking a year ahead. And so when we get to those items, we were going to talk a little bit about that. We have an item today that's going to look back at the last 3 years. And then we were essentially proposing that it's like, all right, and that's it looking backwards. Now let's look forward
good.
and now let's start planning for the next year. And so that is a key change. And then just having the Measure U committee be part of the budget process where it's planning for the year ahead. And then when that gets approved, the money that's for projects will go into the capital reserve fund and stay there for those projects. And that's why, you know, it's all trying to work together. To me, it's the point of what this should be is, you know, an oversight committee, making sure that the money's getting where it's supposed to be and that we're using it for the things we say we're going to use it for. So that we're just trying to tighten that up.
Well, a big part of the problem is that we didn't have any meetings. They wouldn't give us any information. I mean, we finally, since you guys have started again, now there's an accounting. We see where the money went. You know, some of this stuff is line items. I don't know what that really means, but it seems valid to me. And so we have an accounting and we know where the money went and how much we have left over. And yeah, so it's, I'm much relieved.
Thank you. Yeah, our joke is that we're going to give you so much information that you start complaining about it. So that's what we're hoping for. But one point there too, like you mentioned, like the line item accounting and everything. One of the items we'll get to because we can probably wrap this up in a minute. This item up, but we were talking about setting up a standard form each year to show very simply, you know, what projects the money's going to and everything. So that's in one of the items that we're going to look at.
Okay, so that's all I had on. Is there any more questions in regards to the reserve policy?
I think the last point that Lupe spoke to is so we recommended it, the council approved it, and then good news was we had some a one-time revenue come in, and one of my things I push is when you have one-time revenue, save it because don't get used to spending one-time revenue because it doesn't come in every year. So we had one-time revenue come in, and so the council agreed to take 1.5 million of that and start the capital reserve fund. So we're able to sort of start the fund with some funding for projects.
I'm not sure if this is the right time to ask this. If not, we can do it later when it comes up. But so if I reviewed all this stuff, and in most years we have saved more than we saved last year. I think it went up. We overspent. Well, we spent more money than we took in, but we had the reserves to do that. So if we take this, the bulk of the surplus, so to speak, we have, and lock that up, what do we do if costs, the police need more money or something like that? So I was thinking maybe we do part of it, and I don't know how to handle that.
Yeah, um, and you can tell me if I start getting too off
Yeah, I think
the
we probably should
agenda.
vote on this one.
Oh, okay.
Or do you wanna call we have a recommendation on, because we thought we talked about doing them separate. The first
Yeah.
one is the recommendation to receive.
Find the right time to get back
the
to that.
next. It's in the next.
Okay, got it.
So I think if you would read the recommendation and take a vote on.
We have no public comment, I suspect, right, on this? Okay. Um, Does the committee have any further comments?
No.
We have a recommendation to receive a report from the city's recently approved capital resource reserve fund that will allow the city to put funds aside for specific purposes. May I have a motion and a second?
I motion that we create the capital reserve fund.
Second.
Okay, can you take a vote?
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? None. Hearing none, motion passes unanimously.
Now we're to the summary.
So the second part of, let me go, of the presentation is summarizing the expenditures that we've reported in the past to the committee. And on the PowerPoint slide, I just summarized what you have in the handout. The handout is each attachment has the details that were provided for each of the fiscal years. In fiscal year 2020, 21, that was the year where we had the most amount of revenues that exceeded expenditures. We had revenues of $3.2 million, and then the expenditures that were reported were $1.9 million. And so it generated $1.3 million that was not used, quote unquote. And then just want to touch on that a little bit because there were expenses that could have been coded, applied to Measure U, but at the time, our legacy system and our coding process was not, was limited. And so we did not code everything to Measure U. And so it makes it, on paper, what we reported, that we have $1.3 million. Then going to the next fiscal year, we had revenues of $3,068,000, and we had reported expenditures of $2.4 million. So there again, another year where we had more revenues than expenditures that were reported by $645,000. And both of these reports have already been included in the audited financials, so I didn't make any changes as far as what type of expenditures were in there because they've already been done, audited, so I just wanted to illustrate them on here. And then this last fiscal year, we did make some changes from the last time what I reported for fiscal year 22-23. So in 22-23, the last time we met, I had reported the revenues of 3.4. Those have not changed. The expenditures are almost 3.7 million. So we have more expenditures than revenues. And the reason being is that we removed the public works project, and then we added all the pre-construction work that has taken place and it has been paid for Bubbling Springs. So that's the reason that number went up. And I could do that because we haven't officially closed the year. We're still going through the audit, so the auditors are still taking entries and all that good stuff. So they haven't finalized the audit. And so when I roll all those numbers, the 1.3, the 645, and then the 275, which is a credit in this case, more expenditures than revenues, that's how we get to the 1.7 that we're saying. And to city manager's point, if we had a reserve, that 1.7 will be in the reserve, right? Because we would have had those years, we would have set it aside because it was intended for capital projects when we did, each fiscal year. But because we didn't have a reserve, anything that is a surplus in the general fund automatically rolls into the unassigned fund balance. So it's almost like
Can you say
any surplus in the general fund at the end of the fiscal year when we close the year, so if overall revenues for the general fund exceed the expenditures, it rolls into the unassigned fund balance. So it's like on the personal side, right? If you have income and then you have your expenses for the year, if you don't have a savings account, it automatically goes into your checking account. So
Okay.
it just, so that's kind of a,
Gets
uh,
mixed into the
into the pot.
which is that how it gets.
And so that's kind of what happened with the city not having specific designation for different type of reserves, right? Um,
So I think to summarize, over the last 3 years, there's $1.7 million that probably, or, that basically that 1.7 either got mixed into the pot or it got spent on projects that I think were Measure U,
mhm,
but they weren't clearly reported as Measure U.
They weren't clearly reported.
And so anyway, so that's sort of just recapping the last 3 years, and it also, like we said, ties into why we're looking at trying to do things a little differently in the future and actually um, put the money into a separate reserve and not have it get mixed into the pot.
And the recommendation that we added to the staff report for this specific dollar amount, because it's a pretty significant amount, but we also have a very significant project with the Bubbling Springs
Right.
Park, which is, uh, we are gonna do an RFP and get bids back, but it's looking like, because of the timing, it's been that long since we first did the estimates for what it was gonna cost. It's probably gonna be in the neighborhood of $4 million over what we estimated. So we'll be needing to fund that gap. And that's the recommendation, uh, to allocate this to that reserve, capital reserve fund, but designated specifically for the Bubbling Springs. So,
That falls well under the mandate. I mean, the Park and Recreation, public, public safety and quality of life issues really, and that's clearly smack in the middle of that, so.
We right now we're still planning to apply for grants to cover trying to get grants to cover the overage. We're looking at some other things and trying to manage the costs and all that. So we might not end up having as substantial of a gap
Yeah.
as we think right now, um, but sort of regardless, we were saying if we our recommendation is to um, move this to the reserve for the Bubbling Springs project. And then that's where, when I started earlier and I said that would essentially close the door on the last 3 years. If the Bubbling Springs project, if we get a grant or something and we don't need the funding, then we would come back and have another discussion. But right now, that's our recommendation to move forward. We went to bid on that project. The bids close on January 14th. So on January 14th, we should have a very clear picture of exactly what that cost is. But right now, we think it's probably between $2 and $4 million short. So this would definitely help with that.
So if you get a lower bid and you got a bunch of grants,
Mhm.
then this money is still in the capital improvement.
Still there.
And we have $25 million of other stuff
Yep.
that it needs to go to, so.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Including, there's other parks and recreation projects that we can talk about then. That's best case scenario. If we end up with money, we don't expect.
I don't
to have
think
at
that's
the end.
gonna happen. In case it
Yeah.
did.
Exactly. So that's sort of our recommendation, and then that, like we said, it's sort of closing out the last 3 years, and then allowing us to sort of shift to looking at next year's proactively. So,
Okay, any questions?
I like the plan.
Sounds good.
Yeah, got some clarity on this. It feels like
Right.
we know where the money's going. It's all, it's all
Start
good.
fresh and be on.
Like got a
top of it.
base to
that's what I
start.
was saying. Like looking forward to starting fresh, and then actually, like it's like in the future, and when we get to the schedule, it'll be on there. But one of the meetings we were talking about, it's like it should be us sort of debating whether we think things are appropriate or not for next year's budget.
Right.
Like that's really the goal. So
Yeah, some of the stuff like fixing up the lounges and stuff, I think.
yeah,
that
the
would be a-
Public Works Lounge is an
that-
example.
Some of that stuff would be,
Yeah,
maybe it's
that would-
valid, but I think
Yeah, but
I'd
just
like to have
not
a say
for
in
this
it,
particular funding source.
but it's
The-
done.
the Recommendation just needs to be edited a little bit because right now it says receive and file the historical measure, summaries of Measure U revenue and expenditure reports, and recommend that the remaining funds be allocated towards an anticipated funding gap in the Bubbling Springs Park Renewal Project, but I think it should read allocated to the general fund, capital reserve.
To the
Fund.
capital reserve.
My only concern is so we started the 23, 24 fiscal year, we're about halfway through, part of the way through it, right? Starts in, okay, so if there was a shortfall there, we don't have anything to go back to. Should we put the whole 1.725 into that fund because it just makes it, our problems go away? Or should we keep some as a reserve?
I think it's this is where this stuff gets like complicated and part of why we're trying to clean up what we're trying to clean up because I think it's almost like the gap that we could have this year, I think is directly related to the same gap we're talking about, which is the Bubbling Springs project. And I think our budget, is fairly balanced. We're looking at a couple changes to really try to make sure it's balanced. But the wild card right now is the Bubbling Springs project. And if, for example, if this funding wasn't available, we'd have to look at our budget and find, $2 to $4 million for that project. So I think this does sort of serve both of those purposes.
Okay. Um,
So the recommendation, read the recommendation and then take a vote. So
you read the same thing, huh? Okay.
it just,
Or you could just
They
make a
receive
motion
and
to
file
do
the
that.
historical summaries of Measure U revenue and expenditures reports and recommend that the remaining funds be allocated towards anticipated funding gap in the Bubbling Springs Park Renewal Project. May I have a motion?
and so they will be transferred to the capital reserve fund.
So we're making a motion to put that money in.
To transfer it to the capital
Okay,
or
I'll
the
make the
Bubbling
motion.
Springs Park.
Have a second?
Second.
And we have a vote?
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. Yeah.
Relief.
Yeah, so,
Take a breath.
yeah.
Next thing you know.
So on the next couple of slides, I just wanted to talk about what we kind of touched on already. The goal for the Measure U, for this committee is obviously to engage the committee to provide feedback on projects going forward. We'll go through the proposed agenda that I have right now. It's March will be our next meeting. Staff will be providing the committee a report, the proposed budget for fiscal year 24-25. So even, the city does a 2-year budget, but every year we still update the budget, right? Because we have, based on trends and our actual. Hello.
Aye.
If you're on Teal Road, you're probably in trouble.
Oh, no.
I'm glad you made it.
You're not.
And so staff will be presenting to council, talking about the budget for fiscal year 24-25,
Okay.
an updated budget for adoption. And at that point, we would include a budget for the Measure U revenue and expenditures. And at the March 24th meeting, staff will provide with the proposed line items and projects, and then it will be the committee for discussion, review, and recommendation. And then we would take that back and include it into the city's budget. So then from So we'll be doing it ahead of time, so, right, so then we'll know what projects and how much money is gonna be allocated to Measure U. I included the budget timeline just so that the committee has it for information. March 27th is the date the committee will make a decision on projects. And if there's more time that's needed, um, we can work around that. We can always have a special meeting because the budget, we're intending to take it to council on May 20th. So there's some time in between the next meeting and then the following meeting, if we need to call a special meeting or a Zoom meeting or however we decide we need to meet or the committee needs to meet, if more time is needed. Um,
Can I ask, so we've seemed to have varied about $200,000 in the income coming in over, I looked at 3 years. The first 3 months didn't help too much. So what are we anticipating for, I know that's a bit of a crystal ball, but I think we're averaging about 3.2.
Measure U for sales tax, because it's part of the sales taxes. um, They're starting to level off in our discussions with HDL, but because we had such strong years during COVID, uh, that it was almost like an artificial spike. People buying stuff, and so we were getting the sales taxes, the transaction taxes as well on the Measure U. Um, HDL provides the city with forecast projections, so they're working on those based on what they're seeing, actual data. So we're gonna be meeting with HDL early in January, February. We've asked to be one of the first ones to meet because they have meetings with all the cities throughout the, beginning of the year. Um, and then based on that, they actually provide us with a forecasted number for.
So we don't know yet.
We don't have it yet, no. What I
So
have is what we had 2 years, or when we did the 2-year budget, which is somewhat dated because things have changed, yeah.
Say the budget that's adopted, I think it was pretty much in line
We pretty much mirrored the same.
with historical. I think that maybe the point Lupe was making is we expect that to change.
Mhm.
And we had an item recently at council where we talked about the cannabis revenues dropping and then some changes to state law that are gonna even maybe drop a little bit more, where we can't collect on the excise tax. That's a tax on tax. So uh, I I think our sort of immediate reaction is that we think it's going to be less than it's been the last couple years, and then we're probably going to have to adjust a little bit downward from what the adopted budget said. But to Lupe's point, she mentioned HDL. HDL is our sales tax auditors, and they look at statewide trends, and then they give us projections based on what they see statewide. And we have meetings scheduled with them in January to try to anticipate what's coming in the next year. But
we can probably expect this to drop a little bit then.
I think it'll
Yeah.
be a drop a little
Line.
bit. Well, and even what Lupe mentioned, Wanimi was uniquely fortunate that during COVID, all of these things went up. And that was not typical. In most cities, tax revenues took a hit.
How much of it was weed?
Yeah, and so I was gonna say, I don't know if that's common knowledge or not, but the cannabis sales, to everybody's surprise, because everybody thought everybody was gonna be broke and everything, and cannabis sales would plummet. They ended up spiking. They've
Right.
never been higher, and they're coming back down to earth now. So as you look at these 3 years that you mentioned are all sort of those COVID years. So I think we're already sort of on pace where those were gonna come down, and then we have the cannabis tax changes in competition of 18 new dispensaries opening around us. And my expectation is that our sales tax revenue, our Measure U revenue, and our cannabis tax revenue are gonna drop.
Yeah.
So
Seems
we're trying to get
reasonable.
prepared for that. That's part of, why we're trying to do some things to be in better position for if that starts.
Let's all support Grocery Outlet when they move in.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah.
They do expect, well, consumer spending is already starting to pull back because of the interest rates. So that was something they didn't expect 2 years ago when they did the projections.
It just dropped today.
Oh, they did?
Dow Jones just did it. they did something where they're not moving it up. The Dow Jones hit its all-time high.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So maybe we got a soft landing here.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, yeah, they, the sounds are that they think that they have avoided a possible recession, which is, which is the goal. I think
Mhm.
I've sort of I've been trying to start preparing for in case that recession
Mhm.
happens. But if it doesn't happen, then we'll be even in better shape than we fear. So,
So again, once the projections are available and then we do the projection, we'll send it out and I'll target to get it out early so that the committee has time to review it and ask questions. And then when we meet, we can discuss. Um, And then again, the budget timeline is included for reference. So that's the dates that we're gonna take it to council. Technically, we have to have it approved before July 1st. Right now, I'm targeting to take it May 20th. It gives us a couple more meetings in June in case we have to make any adjustments or council has any questions. So it should be fully approved before the July 1st new fiscal year starts. And so I think the last slide, I just had the action items, which some have already been voted on. I think the next one, which is number 3, is the committee was going to appoint 1 or 2 members to prepare the annual report that would be submitted to city council.
So who would like to help write the report?
Sure you have it.
Who doesn't want to do it?
This is the report that would be due March 27th.
It would not be due March 27. The intent is March 27 is the time for review discussion. So it would be due before the May 20th. So sometime before, maybe like sometime in April, early May.
Yes. Up to the committee first. We accept it, okay, or make changes in it, then it goes to the council. So the whoever writes this has to keep it in a way that everybody, at least 3 people agree with.
Go to council, right? Like
And I
sometime
think
in May.
basically this is, since we've not ever done this before, it should include all the stuff that we talked about today, the last 3 years. But we have the data now, it's pretty straightforward.
yeah, and I was joking, obviously, when I said not me, but one thought would be, and so I think I'm hearing, and I'm new, so I thought maybe we did this like every year and we had a process. It sounds like maybe this is the first time we've done it.
It was supposed to happen, we had
It
no
was
meetings.
supposed to
I
get
mean,
done
they
and never got done.
kicked
Yeah.
us to the curb.
So one idea, because we did that summary for the last 3 years, and we can put that, like a couple pages report together with that summary and bring it back and start there and see if, like, bring it back to the committee, and then maybe the committee like can use that as a template and decide if, what needs to be added or if a committee needs to be formed. So we could do that, but obviously if you want, if the committee wants to write the report, you can. I'm not saying you can't, but I think in the past the report couldn't be written because you didn't get that information.
Right.
Now we're providing it, so we could put a template together and bring it back for the next.
Yeah,
committee
like I think
too.
to your point, the attachments could be the same attachments pretty much.
This last
It's just
2 years.
it's more of summarizing, yeah.
I think that'd be a good idea because it would kind of give somewhat of a guidance for the person.
Probably be the attachments
the
and then what was discussed and approved today to allocate the 1.7 to the reserve, and then that kind of closes up to 2023. So probably, it's never happened, so imagine it could just be like a summary with attachments.
So
And it would go to consent, right, and consent to city council.
first one together is a template, and then, but like I said, still bring it back to the committee to modify or change as the committee wants and try to.
But James is gonna, what he's
Yeah, I
saying,
guess-
what I hear him say.
It's like volunteering after all.
We can do that.
Since the item is in consent, that means we wouldn't be doing like a presentation on it. Oh,
Could do either way. I think what we're saying is, I think we're sort of understanding we haven't done it before, so I guess we have the ability to decide how
Yeah,
we're gonna do it.
yeah.
So it could be something where the committee could, present it to
Mhm.
council at the beginning of the meeting or, something like that too, so.
I think
so-
it's important that that we stand up in front of the city council and public and say, here's what we found.
Yeah, and show that
Make
there's
it
actually
transparent.
oversight, yeah.
Yeah, and essentially, we didn't get any data for a long time. We
Mhm.
have it now.
Yep.
Here's what we found.
And there again, some of the same PowerPoint slides could be used, I mean, just an ad. So, yeah, I mean, I can assist, some of the same PowerPoint slides can be
Yeah,
used
absolutely.
for council, but yeah, I can send them to whoever gets appointed, yeah.
I guess the first question right now is, do you want us to start and prepare something and bring it back? Or do you want to appoint one or two members to prepare something?
Thoughts? What do you think?
I think he's got the right idea.
If I were
Because
you,
it'll
that's
give
the one I'd
guidance,
pick.
the one that's actually gonna write it.
Oh, yeah, if you can follow,
Right.
do that, and then we'll review it, and if we want to make changes in it, we will.
So we'll have it for the next meeting.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Okay,
And then in future years, we'll probably, the committee should probably do it. But
Yeah,
this
and we
is-
could basically hand it to you and then each year's, somebody can update it.
Yeah,
Right, right.
good.
okay.
That's a relief.
Yeah.
But, we can vote on this?
Okay.
No votes needed, because we'll bring
No.
it to the next one and
Yeah.
then, they'll, at that time, we'll have the vote to either accept it or not. So.
Okay, the last item is adopting the calendar schedule.
We didn't do the minutes either.
Oh,
We didn't
approval of the
okay it la-
minutes.
it-
It's the beginning when
we did that
We did?
first.
Okay.
Did that first.
So the calendar, those are the just dates that I taking a look at the calendar, I proposing these dates. We can make any changes that once I stayed away from like 4th of July. And then December, I did it early December because of the holidays. But we can always change it, even if it's adopted as is, we can move it. Yes, the first date would be March 27th. And keeping them all at 4 o'clock is, I think, what we had talked about, but we can always move that too.
Can it-
July
Is
24th.
it possible to move it an hour later? No, you have trouble getting here sometime, and I value you being here, so. Can we move it to 5?
Suggest, I think it'll be best, especially because I'm in probation right now in my job, so.
Can't be cutting out early.
Okay, so the first date will be March 27th at 5. And then July 24th will be the second meeting at 5. So at 5, September the 25th at 5 p.m. and then December 4th at 5.
Are these all the same day of the week?
I believe they're all Wednesday.
Okay,
Because
Wednesdays, okay.
yes. March the 27th, yes. And then July the 24th is a Wednesday, September 25th, yes.
Okay, good.
December 4th, yes, they're all Wednesday.
So part of the committee's job, I think, is to make recommendations about what, we'll talk to people, see what they think, see what they want, stuff like that. But where does that come into the process?
I think, it would be between now and March 27th. So on March 27th, we're basically gonna come back and say, here's what the budget's looking like, here's what here's what we're looking at, here's what we propose. We're gonna try to use the same format, and that's one of the points I made, the reports that we provided on the last 3 years, coming in and saying, here's what we would propose for next year. And then at that meeting that would be a good time, if you say, well, I've been hearing from the community that we need this project and that's not on the list. And then that's where we can have that discussion 2 months before the item actually goes to council for approval. So between now and then, but we also said at one point, if we need to have a special meeting, let's say in April, probably when it would be, if you want to get the information in March and then go out and talk to people, and then we could come back and do a special meeting in April and say, okay, I'm hearing good things about this, or I'm hearing people saying we missed this thing, you know? So either of those two paths, it's just, if we want to try to do it in one meeting in March, or if we want to start it in March and have a special meeting in April. I think those are the two options.
What do you think?
Sounds fine to me. I mean,
Well, we got two choices. I mean, when is the, trying to send the stuff in ahead of time before March or present it at that meeting, perhaps?
And one thought too on that is, and maybe what we can do to help actually is, we can commit to get that information out a couple weeks before the meeting, maybe 2 weeks prior, and then that way you still, you know, you have a chance to talk to people and get some feedback from people.
So we could
there.
address that in that March meeting. then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I
Yeah,
think,
if we can provide it 2 to 3 weeks before, then it gives you an opportunity to reach out, and
Yep.
then maybe at the 27th,
Yep.
we could finalize it, and if it doesn't get finalized, we can add another meeting date to the calendar.
I'm always trying to listen to what's going on, what people are complaining about and what they feel like they need to address. So, you know,
One of the biggest complaints in the city's been people racing around, and we got a motorcycle cop who I hope will write tickets faster than he can,
I was in a meeting yesterday with the police department,
and he wants to.
and they had the radio, you know, the radios on, and I heard him calling 3 or 4 calls in that hour, and I said, enjoy it now, because I think pretty soon the calls will be complaining about that darn motorcycle. So we're in the sweet spot right now.
I just about got run over by a truck coming out of Surfside Drive there, but
We definitely could use it. We can use the traffic enforcement at this point. And so I think the positive is, I think we have all the pieces in place now to actually like really start making a difference on the traffic issues. So,
I expect really good things, so.
Okay, we need a vote to adopt calendar recommendation, but we're moving the time to 5 o'clock for all the dates.
it's approving the dates with the
Mhm.
time of
The
5
time of
o'clock. And then I think we should include, and then that we'll get information out 2 weeks in advance of that.
Okay, do we have a motion?
Say ditto if you want.
Okay, what we're voting on is, do we accept the meeting dates
Mm.
with the time change to 5 o'clock instead of 4 o'clock?
And make the motion.
A motion, do I have a second? Favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? None. Motion passes.
That way the cop's not gonna be following you in here. Or we'll call them ahead of time, you get in the back.
Okay, so the next meeting will be the March 27th at 5 p.m. We adjourning the meeting at 4:56.
Coming.
yes, thank you.